Welcome back to Rides and Rigs. I've got a short one for you today. I wanted to talk about this old engine that's been sitting in the garage for a while now. This is my 24 valve Cummins, a 5.9 liter turbo diesel that I picked up a few years ago when my diesel Suburban started knocking. Fortunately, it was just an injector knock. I managed to remedy it by holding the poor girl at full throttle for a few seconds in a bout of frustration. I figured the knock would either fix itself or the engine would let go. I won that battle. I still need to replace the injectors, but she keeps going down the road pretty reliably for now. I found this gem on Facebook Marketplace and managed to bring the whole mess home for just 500 bucks. Now, it's cost me significantly more to get it where it's at now, so let's get into that. This is a Brazilian-built block with casting number 55, which is alleged to be the best of the 24 valve blocks as they are significantly less prone to catastrophic cracking. This engine was built in October of 2001 for an 02 Ram 2500. I don't know exactly how many miles were on the truck when it was decommissioned. The gentleman I purchased this engine from suggested the truck had 190,000 miles, but given the plans that I had at the time for this engine, I wasn't particularly concerned with that. Our first step after getting this engine home was getting it inside and on a stand and disassembled. The inside of this engine looked just immaculate, and it was obvious to me that no one had been inside of it before, so I was pretty excited about that. After that, I got it sent down to the machine shop and waited patiently while amassing a small collection of parts. Once I got the engine home and back on the engine stand, it was go time. I put the head on its own engine stand and lapped the valves in, followed by some new Viton valve seals. The valves were then installed with some Hamilton 103-pound valve springs. Once the head was complete, I turned my attention back to the bottom end, installing the crankshaft with new Clevite main and rod bearings. I also replaced the cam bearing with a new one from Clevite. The rings were replaced with a standard set from Molly. The pistons were then sent home into a fresh, clean block. Piston protrusion was checked, and they were consistently on the high side of Cummins specification, but they were within spec nonetheless. Once I had the bottom end buttoned up, we set the head on it with a new multi-layer steel gasket and ARP head studs. I chose not to O-ring this engine because I didn't feel it was necessary based on the plans that I had and the power goals that I had at that time. Purchased a new stock exhaust manifold for this build, although that may change depending on what we do with it. We might put a performance manifold on it. Next up, we put some Hamilton extreme duty push rods in it. These things just look absolutely monstrous next to the factory push rods for these engines. Once we had those installed with the factory rockers and bridges, I then set and checked the valve clearance and installed the push rod cover, as well as a fuel pump block-off plate. I replaced the plastic plug in the side of this block where some of these engines had a crankshaft position sensor. Allegedly, Cummins stopped using this position for a crankshaft position sensor about mid-year 2000 and replaced them with this plastic plug that gets incredibly brittle and very stuck after nearly 200,000 miles. After all that, I replaced the injectors with diesel auto power 8x9 VCO injectors, which are advertised as 125 horsepower over stock. The injectors went in and the engine was subsequently covered and pretty much hasn't been touched since about a year and a half. I do have a handful of other parts for it, like a new oil pump and fuel lines, and realistically we're only lacking a few parts at this point, like a turbo and an injection pump, and we should be able to have this thing running. If I were putting it in the Suburban as I had originally planned, I was going to use a rebuilt standard VP44 injection pump with an Edge comp box and a Stealth 64 HX35 turbo from the guys at Calibrated Power. But of course the turbo may change depending on what I do with this engine. At this point, I don't intend to put it into the Suburban due to the transmission requirements for such a torquey engine. And that leaves me with this question. What on earth am I going to do with this thing? Now, my thought was to put it in an old square body Chevrolet, a crew cab dually, but of course those are getting harder to find, especially at a reasonable price. We joked for a while about putting it into a retired Grumman mail truck as they get phased out, but I don't actually think the chassis would handle it very well and probably would be pretty useless at that point. I've also considered building a dragster for it, but then I'm sure we'll run out of power long before we get competitive with it, so I'm not sure about that. That's where I'm at. I don't know what to do with this thing. Do I swap it into something? Mothball it for a rainy day? Sell it and invest more into some of my other projects? I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I sure appreciate you all watching. If you enjoy this content and would like to see more like it, please hit the subscribe button down below. Let me know how I'm doing with a like and a comment, and of course you can hit the bell to receive notifications when new content becomes available. Thanks again for watching this episode of Rides and Rigs, and we'll see you next time.